Welcome to all my subscribers, followers, and listeners out there to the 106th episode of the Lessons from the Cockpit Show. I'm your host, Mark Hasara, and for over 60 years, my passion has been everything aviation. I'm an airplane nerd, grew up building plastic model airplanes, and had my first experience with airplanes when I was 5 years old, standing on Grandpa Andy's car, watching a 707 landing at LAX. On the Lessons from the Cockpit Show, we interview some of the most fascinating and unique pilots, aircrew members, maintainers, and aviation enthusiasts from all over the world. But more importantly, what did they learn from these extreme and extraordinary military, commercial, and even general aviation environments? The purpose of our show is to illustrate how does the aviation world work, but more importantly, increase critical thinking skills both in the air and on the ground. Some of the stories that you hear on the Lessons from the Cockpit Show are being told for the very first time. And today, we're fortunate because we have two guests on at the same time, both of them commanders from the Marine Corps. Yes, my good friend Shrek, second episode, but he brought one of his buddies with him. This episode of the Lessons from the Cockpit Show is brought to you by Wall Pilot, custom aviation art for the walls of your home, office, or hangar. These are 4, 6, and 8-foot beautifully drawn prints of your favorite airplanes, like 8874 you see here behind me, my airplane when I was stationed at Kadena. There's 158 ready to print famous airplanes from World War II all the way up to modern jets. But if you want, we can do custom aviation art too. We can do a print of your favorite airplane from whatever unit you want to, whatever time period, whatever weapons load, tail number, doesn't matter. We can do it for you. Go to wallpilot.com and fill out our custom form and let us draw you your favorite airplane. Or just go by the website, wallpilot.com, look through some of the ready to print and order a couple of these, because that's how the show keeps going. Folks, today we're going to finish up with my good buddy Shrek, but he brought one of his buddies with him. They happened to be domiciled together before they were going out to fly. So Colonel Byron Sullivan, Shrek, has his good friend Colonel Steve Gillette, call sign Glibby. Shrek, as you know, commander of Operational Test and Evaluation Squadron, VMX-1. Glibby was the commander of MOTS-1, the Marines Top Gun School. They share the same building. Shrek at one end, Glibby at the other. And this is a great, great conversation. So, grab an adult beverage of your choice, sit down, strap in, and let's get going with the 106th episode of the Lessons from the Cockpit Show. Hey, Shrek, great to have you back, brother.
Good to be back, man. How you doing?
I'm doing great, man. Other than my allergies are raging out here in Utah, I'm sure you've got the same thing going on back there.
Oh yeah, and in Newark and in like Allentown and Panama and wherever else I was this week. I got off the air. I was landing today, and I was this morning, and I was just like, "Ooh, man, allergies." My sinuses are just like, "Where have you been? What are we doing here?" I got back, and of course, my truck is covered in green. It's like no wonder. But yeah, it's good to be back.
I appreciate you spending more time with me. So, hey, I want to get back into some operational test discussion with you. And, a lot of people, the Air Force has its 422nd test. You guys have BMX-1. Explain to our viewers and listeners why we even do operational tests and evaluation, because everybody thinks, okay, well, we test the airplane anyway, but now this takes it to a completely different level where, you're dropping bombs and all kinds of stuff. Explain that for just a few moments.
Yeah, so if you can imagine, so we have developmental tests is where it starts, right? So you have a weapon system or an aircraft or whatever, and we make sure that it's safe and that it operates and as it's functioned, right? the F-35 is a great example. We will do, routinely at VMX1, we would often be 3 to 6 software builds ahead of where the fleet was uh, with operational tests. So, whatever we're testing software X and the fleet is operating on software W, right? And and why that's important is because by the time we hand it to the fleet, we need to make sure that it does all the things that they say that it's going to do, and that the user interface is good, and it's accomplishing the mission that it was designed to accomplish. So, I'm trying to think of a good example, but if you've got a bomb and you're like, hey, I'm going to press the button and it's going to do this and everything's going to be great, well, that's fine. But how am I going to employ that weapon in a tactical manner now? So now you take it, and pretty soon we'll bring Steve Gillette in, who is the MOTS 1 CO, the Marine Aviation Weapons and Tactics Squadron 1 commanding officer, at the same time that I was the VMX 1 CO. And let me backtrack a little bit. The 422 is next to the WIC, the Air Force Weapons School, right? And so oftentimes we work together, or they work together. The Marine Corps decided to steal that same model in 2016 when we put VMX1 together. And the idea behind that is we will take our operational test platforms and we will go execute in large force exercises along with when the weapons tactics instructor course is going on at MOTS 1. And then we'll check it out and we'll be like, okay, cool. Like it's doing the things that it was designed to do, or it's not. Or we found this weird one-off anomaly that we didn't expect to find. And it's something that might not be found in developmental tests because the DT guys don't get to play with it as much as we do. And so once we're done with a build, or once we're done testing a certain software, for example, on the F-35, we would come back and say, okay, here are all the deficiencies. And then you level them out and you say, this one is a critical deficiency and we cannot send this to the fleet because it doesn't do this effectively, or the thing that you fixed, something else got messed up, if that makes sense. So that would be the F-35 as an example. When we, testing the 53K, the 53 kilo, the CH-53K is a great example of what operational test is designed to do. So we're given this huge heavy lift platform, okay, and it's supposed to do all these things. It's like, okay, great. Well, the DT guys, the developmental test guys, say, hey, it can lift a whatever, it can lift this big tank, or it can lift whatever it's going to lift, and then they put it back down, and they're like, it did it. Well, we go, okay, well, operationally, how are we going to take that tank, and what are we going to do, and what are the operational benefits of it? I'll give you a quick example. We took an LAV off of the boat, off of an LHD, so a landing assault vehicle, and we took it off of one of our small deck boats, off of one of our amphibs that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
And we took that helicopter and we said, okay, well, operationally, this helicopter, this aircraft should be able to take this piece of equipment all the way to the beach at a certain airspeed, be there at this time, drop it off, and then go all the way back to the boat without refueling. Whereas CH-53 Echo might not be able to carry that equipment all the way there and back without refueling. And, it's just a small example of, the different things that, that we might test there. Weapon systems, while I was there, we were testing JAGM off of the Cobras. And, that was pretty amazing. Hey, it's designed to be able to do this. And so we went down to Tyndall and we flew out of there and we shot boats that were driving to operationally test this missile against fast attack boats that might be attacking, say, a carrier or an amphib. So the idea of operational test is, yeah, we've got an aircraft that flies, it's safe, and the weapon system is not going to interfere with the aircraft itself. The weapon system works. Now, how do we take that aircraft and weapon system and use it operationally? Close air support is a great example, one of my favorites. and the F-35 got a bad rap for close air support. There were a couple workarounds that we had to do when I was initially flying it to make close air support more efficient and effective. But in the end, once we got done testing it, and we made several different corrections to the way that the software was designed, and as I was leaving, we were as efficient and more effective than, say, an F-18. The A-10 was one that was like, oh my God, the A-10 is God's gift to close air support. Well, yeah, in a permissive environment where you don't have any kind of surface to air missiles that you got to worry about, yeah, it's great. If you can roll around and shoot at tanks all day with that massive gun, that 30 millimeter cannon, that's awesome. But, in the F-35, I'm able to load this thing up with, 4 internal bombs and 3 and 4 more external bombs. And I also have a gun. And the gun's a great story. Like, a great example. In the F-18, our gun had a 6 mil dispersion. And that's because none of us, are, I'm brain farting on his name. Who was it? Audi, the sniper. Anyway, none of us are perfect shot every time.
Chris
right?
Kyle.
You're literally, what's that?
Chris Kyle.
No, we're not Snotch or Hathcock.
Hathcock. Oh yeah, Carlos Hathcock.
We're not Carlos Hathcock. Not one kill. But when we tested the F-35's gun on the F-35B, we failed it because it was too accurate. There was not enough dispersion.
Really?
And we ended up figuring out how to make a workaround for it. But like in the F-18, when you came down on the trigger to strafe somebody, you would actually push the stick into the trigger to keep the nose in the exact spot. You left the pipper right on the target because the dispersion of the bullets came out and it was 6 mils. So as it got a little farther away, each one of those bullets was just a little bit further away. Think of it like I'm trying to shoot a bird with a shotgun, or I'm trying to shoot a bird with a 30-30 or a 22 or something like that, right? So, you're not going to hit the bird with a 22. You've got a good shot at hitting it with a shotgun. And the F-18 was designed to have a dispersion. And so what we had to do operational test-wise with the F-35 was, okay, we've got this weapon system. We failed it because it was too accurate. It was literally a laser beam. It hit the dot. And if the dot, the dot at the range that you're strafing is the same size as the vehicle. So if the dot isn't directly on the vehicle, if I miss it by this much, it misses the vehicle by this much. And so in the F-18, you would hit the vehicle because there's a dispersion of those bullets. In the F-35, what we had to do is come up with a kind of a workaround, if you will, on a strafe technique, which, in the F-18, we would have called it John Wayning. Like you see those pictures of guys strafing the boats in Vietnam, and you see this huge, bullet impact like this, and then it goes over the boat. Well, we don't want to do that in the F-18. We'd aim at the boat, push down to make sure that as we're ramping down like this, the bullets continue to go in the same area, and then it becomes more of an area weapon. There's a mil dispersion. So in the F-35, if you did that and you missed the boat by this much, you missed the boat by this much. Well, what we ended up doing was we came up with a technique to push the stick back and forth a little bit and add a little bit of rudder as you came down the chute. And it was very effective. But, it was one of those things. That's a great example of operational tests. Like, okay, guys, we failed for this reason. Now we send it back to DT. We say, here's our problem. You guys need to put some dispersion on the gun. Well, that's not going to happen overnight. So in the meantime, we came up with different strafe patterns that allowed us to do sort of this John Wayning technique to create our own dispersion with that laser beam, if you will. I got a great video I can send you. We could play it later if you wanted to, that shows that laser. I mean, we shoot, one night we went out and shot nothing but semi-armor piercing high incendiary tracer rounds. So all tracers, all little mini hand grenades, semi-armor piercing high incendiary tracer rounds, right? So
Yeah.
little hand grenade, it punches through the side of a tank and it blows up and catches fire. It's pretty awesome. So we went out and did that at night with the facts from MOTS 1, the forward air controllers from MOTS 1, and demonstrated it. Hey, look, this is the technique we're going to use and whatever. And it worked, And so sometimes you have to figure out a workaround so that then you can send it to the fleet. And then once you send it to the fleet, you're not like, if you miss the target, you miss the target because the weapon's so accurate. You say, okay, here's the way that we're going to shoot this weapon. So you come up with the tactics, techniques, and procedures, and you give those then to the fleet. And oftentimes we would give them MOTS 1. And because MOTS 1 was right there, I'd invite the instructor pilots over, the Jedi Knights over to fly with us. Now, we didn't want to do that all the time, though. Like, oftentimes it's better to have First Lieutenant Knucklehead, who's just out of the rag, and go, okay, dude, this is your F-35 with the latest generation software on it. It's got all the Gucci gadgets. This is how we want you to use them. And then we'd watch them go out and do it. And then they'd come back and give us feedback. What'd you think about this? What'd you think about that? Oftentimes they didn't know what was good, bad, or other, but we would look at whether they were effective or not in accomplishing the mission. So operational tests are very, very important. Not to mention the fact that where the Marine Corps was going at the time, and still is today, you look at integrating all of these disparate platforms with different communication and data links. And now, ultimately, as I discussed with the MAGTAF, putting the A to the G, right? We talked about that earlier. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, my mission at VMX and when I made my squadron's mission was, hey, that's great. We got a really cool airplane. It does all sorts of fancy stuff, and we came up with cool TTPs to make it work. In the end, that airplane needs to serve as a ground commander. And so how do we make it best support that ground commander? So we did a lot with the ground side as well as the other aviation sides. And then taking it out to the boat as an example. While we were out there, MAG 13 went out and we put 20 F-35s on a carrier, on a small boat, on an amphib. We called it a lightning carrier. It got a lot of publicity. You can look it up.
Yeah, that's a lot of stealth airplanes on one small deck, amphib deck.
Right. And so MAG 13 put that together, but then I worked with the MAG 13 CO and I said, hey man, we can collect a lot of data from this. Another example of operational test was me. In that example, I'd never landed on an LHD. So I'd never come up next to the side of the boat, hover and slide over and come down. I'd always landed on an F-18 the way, you'd normally see it on carrier. So one of the test parameters that we did was how we tested a different syllabus to put guys on the boat. I'd never been to the boat. And so prior to me leading my first division out to the boat, I did 5 simulators. That was it. We told them, we said, look, the simulator training, the fidelity, everything in the sim is good enough. We do not believe that we need to do field carrier landing practices at the field. In fact, those might even be kind of negative training where we can take this thing to the simulator and we can get the exact training that we're looking for. And it's realistic enough that after 5 sims, never being to the boat, never being a Harrier guy, I brought a division in, boop, we hit our Charlie time, boop, sit, bam, everybody landed, we got off. And that was another good example of like operational tests. Like, how else can we do this?
That's amazing, man. That's 35 airplanes on one deck. That's a lot.
20.
But that's still, because I've been on like the USS Iwo Jima, okay? And that's a large deck amphib, but 20 airplanes on that.
So
that's
what we do is generally we put, at any given time, you'd have 9. I think it was 9 that we'd put on the deck, 5 forward and 4 aft of the island. And then you'd launch. And as you launch, depending on the payload, you'd bring guys from the front and put them to the back, and then they'd launch. Or they'd back taxi and launch. But we'd launch, over 8 airplanes and then recover 100% boarding rate. We had pitching decks a couple times, and it was really impressive. We did all sorts of different missions. And I don't want to take credit for that. That was really MAG 13. A good friend of mine, Chad Vaughn, Mo Vaughn, set that whole thing up. We kind of jumped on it because we were like, hey, we can get a whole bunch of test stuff out of this. And oh, by the way, they needed 5 more airplanes. And so we brought our 5 jets out there and did it. And it was really impressive to see.
Oh, I'll bet. Hey, I have flown Lockheed's little unclassified trainer that they or sim that they bring to all the shows like Tailhook and everything like that. Okay. And I remember them saying, "Oh, we have a system in the airplane, the Stovall airplane, that helps you land. It's like I don't want to call it auto land, Shrek, and I guess I really don't know what to call it, but let's talk to that just a little bit about
So
how
auto land, so it doesn't actually land you on the
Mhm.
airplane or on the deck, but as the boat's moving like this, the boat has speed, and then there's a wind speed over the deck. And what we would do is you'd couple up to the boat. And so as you came around the corner, you need to figure out your deceleration timing, right? Because you want to show up, if this is the side of the boat, you want to show up right at the same speed, and you don't want to slow down and be way back here and like creeping forward because behind you, you got 3 other guys that are trying to land. And now you just jacked up the whole landing pattern, right? So your deceleration is something that's very difficult. It's not very difficult. It's pretty easy. Like we did manual landings as well as auto land, but think of the fact that you know you're going to go about 150 yards down the end of the boat from the tail of the boat to your landing spot, and as you pass the tail of the boat, you're doing 60 knots, and so you want to time it just right so that you pull up right next to your spot and you come over and land. And that was the auto land. We also tested out landing straight behind the boat, coming in and just kind of doing more like a rolling vertical landing. So we tested that a little bit. The Harrier had some others when they tried to do that a couple times because they couldn't hover. But the good thing about being able to come up directly behind the boat and land was that if you didn't stop, and so when I stop, I have to have just as much thrust down as I do weight on the airplane. Okay, because my wings aren't producing any lift at that point. But if I've got
Right.
airspeed over the wings, it's assisting me with lift, right?
Correct.
So if I can come over the back of the boat with airspeed on and then land with just a bit of airspeed and then stop it, I can bring back more weight. So say you had two 2,000 pound bombs on the bird, or two 1,000 pound bombs on the bird. Now you're bringing it back, and you're like, oh man, it's too hot, whatever the problem is, or I got too much gas. You're going to dump gas, and you're going to try and get the weight just right so that when you pull up next to it, it's going to hover and not descend, because that would be bad.
That would be bad.
Yeah, but yeah, so operational test is really where we take the product from developmental test. It's safe, and we go, how do we operationally use this? What are the best ways to use this? And if we find significant faults with the software, we kick it back. And my first, my first software build that we worked on, we kicked it back. I was like, no, it's supposed to do this. And I think one of them was a missile shoot that failed. And I was like, no, we're not. I'm not sending this software to the fleet because it's not it's not operationally effective. And we found flaws that need to be fixed. So Lockheed, you need to go fix these things. And this isn't a DT issue. This would be the guys who build the software. Whatever you did to the software, kept in this case kept the missile in the bay too long, and then the missile got a fault, didn't come out for whatever reason. Um, and so we're like, negative. This is a critical failure. We're not going to give it the ominous dominus to send it to the fleet. And the interesting thing was, especially with the F-35, you had Bravo things that were specific, right?
Mhm.
But then you also had Alpha things, which is the Air Force. And then you had Charlie things, which was the Navy. And so generally what we would do is we'd come together and we'd be like, okay, hey, this is our results, this is our results, this is our results. Can you guys do this? Yeah, we're okay with it, or no. And I remember the first set of software, everybody was going to give it a yes. And I called the CEOs on the phone. I was like, hey, what are you doing? Like, no, it's not doing what it's supposed to do. And this is a critical fault. And if this aircraft goes into combat with the software on, we could potentially hang a missile in the bay, and that's not okay. And, that was just an example of that. Oftentimes there were, you know, oddball things that you'd see as you're flying. You're like, hey, what was that? And then you come back, you look at the tapes, and data was a really important thing. Having aircraft that were what we call orange wired aircrafts. So you had what you got on the tape, your tape, your HMD tape or whatever, or your radar tape. But orange wired aircraft was checking what the actual computer was sending to whatever. So we'd be able to find the faults where they came from and why they came.
Oh, the source of the fault.
So the source of the issue, like where did it come from? Was it the software? Was it the hardware? Or was it the user? And uh, but when you have an orange wired aircraft, you're able to collect data, and the data is very, very important. And so the aircraft that we had a couple of what I called Frankenstein jets when I first got there. And in the end, the goal was, and we did this while I was there, we ended up getting the newest jets off of the line. Okay, so we had the newest jets off the line, and then we put in data collection into them. And sometimes it was a pod you put inside and it'd be able to collect the data for you. And then when you come back, you give the data to the engineers, and those guys calculate it and they look at it and they're like, hey, why is this should be a zero, not a one, and they're like, oh, it happened again, and it happened again, and it happened again. Okay, why is that happening? And they're able to drill down to the root cause of the software, which you can only imagine the amount of code that is in there to make this stuff happen. So you find the one little piece of code that's wrong, and DT didn't find it because DT just flew it to make it sure it was safe. And now we're taking it out and we're putting it through the ringer, and that's where you really get to, especially when you go fly against the systems, the real systems in an operational manner, and you've got jamming coming from F-22s, and all sorts of different things out there to try and replicate what might actually happen in real world. And as we talk about the SU-57 later on, when Steve comes in, so just to throw Steve a plug, he was the first operational commander of the first operational squadron, which was VMFA 121. And so he's been flying the F-35 since its inception. In fact, and we flew our last hop together, so neither one of us has got a leg up on either buddy. Anyway, we actually started as Schedzos together, Schedulous officers in VMFA 232 way back in the day, and ended up, he was the weapons school and I was the operational test squadron, and we flew our last hop together. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, we'll bring that up later. But
I was at my last assignment, Shrek, was at our operational test and evaluation center. Okay. And I think I told you that I sat down. They go, okay, Sluggo, you got all joint weapons. And I'm like, boss, I've not dropped a bomb, shot a missile, shot a gun, any of that stuff. He says, yeah, but you're a weapons school grad. You went through the core courses. So you got all joint weapons. And I go, okay, boss, whatever.
Go figure it out.
Go figure it out. Yeah. And that's what you do, man. You go figure it out. Okay. And this guy changed the way we did things, and you talked about data. And he would say, a piece of equipment is mission capable, partially mission capable, or not mission capable. And here's his reasons. One of those tests was very fascinating. It was the small diameter bomb block ones.
Mm-hmm.
The bombs were good. The rack was problematic. And as you know, you can't take that bomb anywhere without that stupid rack.
Yeah.
And it wasn't feeding the right information to the bombs. There was some release problem. I mean, all kinds of stuff, and again, it was kind of problematic for a while how we were going to fix this. And sure enough, they came back and found some code was wrong, and the code was causing timing issues with the weapon as it came off the brew.
Mm-hmm.
And we would never found that. without operational test, you
Yeah,
know?
that's exactly right. It's your last opportunity
Yeah.
to say, okay, hey, this is good. And, I mean, I think it's a very, very important mission.
Yeah.
And, you know, and, and the other side of it, which was a little bit more than operational tests, which is where I was pushing the squadron as we left. And we ended up putting together a big exercise that has continued on since then and grown a lot of legs. And what we would do is, as an example, we'd say, okay, well, this thing is supposed to be able to land on a road. And what does that mean? Are we going to be able to rapidly rearm it? How are we going to do that? What platform are we going to take? And so we're about to talk about the MV-22, and the MV-22, we had four of them at VMX. And so it's like, all right, guys, here's the deal. I want an operationally realistic scenario. I want to find a road, and I want to land an F-35 on a road. I want to rearm, refuel it, take off, and go out and execute the next mission off of a road. That's why we got the B. It's such, we wanted the B because we had to have vertical, short takeoff, vertical landing, and we ended up finding a road, which was a Harrier road that they used to use out in Camp Pendleton. And so, I was like, all right. And I gave it to one of my best guys, Lieutenant Colonel Sonny Duncan. He's now out of the Marine Corps, got caught up in this COVID BS, but uh, just a great American. And I was like, Sonny, I want you to go ahead and make this happen. Here's my vision, go. And it was great. I mean, we would have V-22s, we'd have F-35 go out, conduct sort of a sweep mission, execute maybe CAS, come back in, land on this road. The V-22s have landed. We had Cobras and Hueys and Overwatch. We've brought the DAS guys, the MAX guys down so that they're providing, local security around the area that we landed. We had our ordies come out. We'd load AMRAAM into the aircraft and bombs that we pulled off the V-22, and then we'd get gas from one of the V-22s and take off and go. And we found a lot of issues with that. But, that's an example. It's like, hey, okay, that's great. We got an aircraft that's got short legs. It's designed to land in like small places or on this, on an amphib. But in the end game, like, how are we going to use this thing? And that was a great example of, now we take multiple weapon systems, aircraft and weapon systems, and capability, move it forward, and truly support that ground commander. Because the ground commander doesn't want you to come in from far away, drop your bombs, have to go all the way back somewhere else and get more bombs and come back. And so we demonstrated that. And so, the Cobra and Huey guys, that's easy for them. They call it a FARP, a forward arming and refueling. And, in the end, now instead of a V-22, you land a 130 and you get all the gas out of the 130, and then you go up and do it again. But, the V-22, if we can roll there if you want to right now with the
Yeah.
V-20.
Well, let's get into that because one thing I want to say about scenarios too was uh, this new commanding two-star general of our ops operational test. He says, guys, we're not using scenarios. Okay. Let's use some real world scenarios and let's use some future scenarios too. Okay. In the Pacific, in Europe, in the Middle East, and everything. And it literally changed the way we did things. And it
Yeah,
was great to see because we could go back and say, this is the scenario that we did this in, which is exactly the kind of scenario you envision employing in. And here are the things that we found.
that's
You
right.
know, here are the
And,
things that we found.
as an example, I can send you this video too, but so I wanted to go out and do it. I went out there. We had bad weather. We couldn't do it. Came back. They ended up going out and do it later, and we put a first lieutenant in the airplane straight out of the rack. We're like, all right, buddy, we want you to go land on that road. And the you can't land on an asphalt road with this thing.
Oh,
It shoots asphalt everywhere. I mean, stuff goes flying everywhere.
yeah.
So he came in for the first low pass, and he was short. And you see asphalt the size of Volkswagens
Oh,
all over the
oh
place. We're like, wave
no.
off, wave off. So he waves off, and then we came back and we got him. lined up onto the concrete part of the road and landed. It was perfect. Everything worked out great. Next airplane came in, landed right behind him, and we did the mission. But that's an example of, okay, I can do it. I got 3,000 flight hours and all sorts of this other stuff. Here's a kid. He's got 200 hours in an F-35. No, I'm sorry, 200 hours total. He's probably got maybe 100 hours, 50 hours in an F-35, and we're like, okay, you're going to take this, you're going to put the velocity vector there, you're going to land it on that road, go. And that's operational test. That's where here's the scenario.
Yeah.
And, it's much like, it's kind of like what I was trying to explain in the beginning. I can drop the GBU-12, beep, and in the perfectly sterile environment, watch it go hit the target. Look at that. It worked great. Developmental test. Now, I'm going to tell you I'm taking fire and I need it on that building over there while we're still lighting it up and doing all these things. How well is the pilot going to do? How well is the weapon system going to do? And put it in a real scenario. And that's what our goal was there at VMX.
Hey, before we move on, I just thought of something. Okay. The F-35 has an internal gun, but the Marine Corps also has an external pod. Is that correct?
So the B does not have an internal gun. Neither does the C.
Got it.
C
Okay.
is for the A, and the reason is because the A has the gun on the left side. It has behind it. It has the standard Air Force style, probe to get gas. The B has a probe that comes out on the right side to get gas. This C also has a probe that comes out on the right side to get gas. The B has that lift fan behind it. No way we can put an internal gun in that aircraft.
Got it.
So we have gun pods, and that's why we have gun pods. So the A has an internal gun. The C has C and B have external guns.
Thank you for making that distinction. I did not know that. But, now that I remember now looking at the configuration of the airplane, I understand that. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So that gun pod that you were shooting at had a laser-like focus on whatever it was shooting at, is what you're telling me.
Yeah, I think that I forget the exact dispersion, but it's very, very small. It was like 0.8 or something like that. So
oh man,
it went exactly where you were shooting it.
Yeah.
And so, it failed because it was too accurate.
Yeah. So just real quickly, you said 6 mils. Okay. Dispersion. How big is that pattern? So, because a lot of people don't
Depends
know
on the distance, right?
Yeah.
So a milliradian. Oh man, you're making me go back. I forget how many milliradians that we have in a compass rose, but
yeah.
So as you go out to say, I want to say 1,000 feet.
Yeah.
I don't know offhand right now. I'm digging, but bottom line is that as those bullets go out, one bullet goes here, one bullet goes here, and then they kind of the dispersion comes out like this. And so that was the other thing. You didn't want to shoot too far away because the bullets would be too wide, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we had ranges that we would shoot in the F-18 that were designed to keep even though you wanted the mill dispersion, you didn't want it too big.
Yeah.
Or else now you've got too many little BBs going all over the place.
Yeah. That's the difference from shooting at like 10,000 feet versus 5,000 feet.
That's right.
Yeah. So,
well, yeah, and what we really shoot on is slant range. So you might be at 5,000 feet pointed down like this, your slant range is 5,000 feet. But if you're 5,000 feet and you're pointed at 30 degrees, well, now your slant range is much different because, I'm here, and if this is the ground and the target's over here, well, yeah, I might be this high above the ground, and like A-10s as an example, they come in low. They use very low angle strafe, whereas the F-18, we would use more high angle strafe. So we could get closer to the target, strafe the target, and once you're done squeezing the trigger, you pull off. But I'm going to have to look up the milliradians. I can't believe I can't.
Nah, don't worry about it.
Anyway.
It's, but it's the difference between the two patterns, okay? And why was the F-35 shooting that pod so accurate? What made it that accurate?
Well, it was the design. I mean, that's the way that they designed it. Okay, let's see. Hang on. 6,400 mils. So in a 360-degree pattern, like a normal compass, you have 6,400 milliradians inside there. Um, why did they make it so tight? I don't know. I don't know. I'm sure it was specifications that somebody gave them, and they're like, okay, we're going to make it accurate. And even, even when you're dogfighting, if you're dogfighting somebody, you want to have a little bit of dispersion. I mean, we used to call it the magic bullet because, you know, those bullets are incendiary rounds. So if they get in there, they're going to catch fire, as well. So, even in a dogfight, we would want those things to have some dispersion. And I'll be honest with you, like the gun pod on the F-35B is not a great dogfighting gun pod because you have to put so much lead because it's aimed down a little bit, whereas in the Hornet, the gun was aimed up 2 degrees. So like if the nose was here, if the nose is here, the gun kind of cants up a little bit. So if I'm chasing a guy like this, I don't necessarily need to pull my nose way out here in lead pursuit to try and have bullets hit him here. I can kind of lean it back a little bit, and the bullets are coming out, going a little bit forward.
F-15s are the same way. The C model, D models, and the E models are all 2 degrees up.
Yeah.
It must be a Boeing thing. Yeah, obviously, for dogfighting it makes sense. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. MV-22.
Yeah.
Such a, I remember seeing Shrek, the very first tilt rotor vehicle that they had at Edwards Air Force Base. And everybody's like going, this is so radical. We have no idea what we're going to do with it, but it looks cool. And it allowed it to do certain things. And now, I mean, that was in the 60s and 70s, I
Yeah.
think. And
Yeah.
now look where we're at, you
Yeah.
know? So
So the
talk about the
V-22.
MV-22.
So yeah, it is a great. I mean, I believe that it's a good airplane. It does require a ton of maintenance, and especially the way that we fly it. I think I talked about this in an earlier podcast where the Air Force birds come in and you can tell that they haven't been landing in the dust or the sand or anything like that, and they're all nice and shiny and clean, and they got all the Gucci gadgets on them and everything. Our birds come in and they're literally, covered in sand, leaking hide fluid all over the place. And that's because we fly them in pretty harsh environments. And but the maintenance man hours per flight hour is enormous. I don't want to give you a number because I don't know exactly what it is right now,
Um,
but it's very high. And in an aircraft like that, where um, it's designed so that if you lose an engine, you have a gearbox that comes all the way through the top of the bird to turn the other prop rotor. So losing an engine isn't that big of a deal. But if you start losing these gearboxes, and I believe there's 5 gearboxes, there's one in the center and two, um, one on each nacelle and one on each wing to move the the nacelles up and down. And so there's just a lot of moving parts. I joke when you fly a Huey, there's 15,000 moving parts all bought at the lowest bidder, all trying to get as far away from each other as possible. Well, there's probably 30,000 moving parts in the V-22 doing the same thing. And and so the heartburn behind that aircraft, no, there's two real issues. You lose an F-18, pilot might eject, he'll be okay, if he gets out, right? If he doesn't, you lose one person. You lose a CH-53K with 40 people in the back, it's a big deal.
yeah,
You lose a V-22 with 20 guys in the back,
that's
it's
a
a
big
big
deal.
deal. And so that aircraft needs to have as many takeoffs as landings every single time. And in the beginning, there were several different things that we didn't truly understand. There was a crash in Yuma once where they had V-22s kind of coming in like this, and the guy behind this guy got into his rotor wash, lost control of the airplane, went down, they all died. And, that's like, holy cow, how did that happen? What happened? It wasn't a mechanical, it wasn't a pilot error thing. It was the fact that the way that we were executing just happened to not work out that day because it was no wind. And that those prop rotor vortices just kept going. And now you're getting this disturbed air. But if you can imagine, like that's the mission of that aircraft. The aircraft is designed to bring in a large amount of force into a localized area, very fast and very hard. Um, so you run into a lot of different issues with the aircraft itself. From the maintenance standpoint, that's the biggest hit that it's going to take is that it's a maintenance intensive airplane. And, it just takes a lot of maintenance man hours per flight hour to get it going. Um, there's a lot of points of failure on the aircraft that you can have. But I would say, from my experience, I mean, I really enjoyed flying in the V-22. I enjoyed flying it. I thought it was a lot of fun to fly. Is a very, I mean, you come into the break in it, I would always come into the break. The guys were always like, "Why are you coming in the break, Skipper?" I'm like, "Because you look cool coming in the break, man. That's why." But well, it's not the fastest way, and I'm like, "That looks cool. Just shut up. Let's do this," But we have used the heck out of that aircraft a lot, and I think it served the Marine Corps well over a long period of time. And it got a lot of bad press in the very beginning. We had some maintenance things that I think were covered up a little bit to try and it was as I said in the beginning, our first operational test squadron that we had in the Marine Corps was VMX-22. And there was a reason that we didn't want the Navy or anybody else testing our aircraft that we were going to have because we were worried that they might fail it. And it was the replacement for the CH-46. And at the time, that was all we had to replace a medium lift helicopter. Um, so, we were getting rid of the 46 and we were buying the V-22. By God, hell or damnation, we're going to get it. And so the Marine Corps decided to make its own operational test squadron, which was VMX-22 in New River. And they put all the heavy hitters in there, and those guys worked their tails off to make it happen. There was a big congressional on it. Some stuff came out about the maintenance, and that didn't provide good press for it. That everybody was worried about it because of the first crash up in Quantico. When one of the engines failed, and the shaft that goes across them, the wings didn't work properly, and they lost them. But those crashes receive a lot of news, and which they should. I mean, you need to make sure you got it right, and those guys, our Marines, worked their butts off to make sure that those things were safe to go flying in, and it was we still had ways to land it even if you were engine out, both engines out. It wasn't pretty, but you could put it down. Um, but
But now it's delivering Marines so much faster to the battle group, and to the battle area now,
yeah,
because it can do what, like 300, 350 knots.
well, generally about 230 is what we
Is
plan
what
for.
you guys crew. Yeah, but still, that's a lot faster than the helicopters are moving
Oh,
people.
totally. Yeah, and they
And so,
outrun all of their support. And generally what we would do is support them with either Hornets or now F-35s, but try and be there when they show up. Um, but yeah, I mean, it definitely has the capability to build up forces quickly. And especially if you're in a denied environment where the boat's got to be really far offshore, now you come into a situation where a 53 Echo doesn't have legs to get there. And it's going to take a long time, and you're going to put a lot of people in danger because you got to bring a tanker to get them to the beach, you know. But I really wish they'd made it pressurized and round instead of square and unpressurized because you're kind of getting out of the threat right around 10,000 feet, but you're still kind of in the threat,
yeah.
when people see you there. So, it's got its goods, its others. It's not definitely not the perfect aircraft, but it does require a lot of maintenance. Um, but when it's flying and it's working well, it is a great aircraft.
Well, and you think about the battle rhythm and in any type of situation, the battle rhythm, if you can get 20 Marines quicker to, a place like Ramadi to fill in a hole somewhere, or go in and rescue some group or something like that, that thing's getting it there faster.
And the only, Ramadi is a great example. Like the V-22 does not do well in Ramadi. You don't have an LZ big enough for it most places.
Mhm.
And if you do, you can maybe get one in there. There was a big push to, the Yankee is a great aircraft. It's, the UH-1 Yankee, and it can carry quite a few Marines, and it can land in a much smaller LZ.
Mhm.
Um, the Black Hawk, those type airplanes. 60s, UH-60s, another great aircraft that has the ability to land in a much smaller LZ than what the V-22 takes up. And that was oftentimes a complaint from the grunts, like we can't put as many on the ground as we need to at the same time, that we could a smaller aircraft. But then you need two aircraft to take as many as the same guys, and they don't go as far. So, it's just like anything. I don't know if you fly GA airplanes, but I want one that does aerobatics. It carries 10 people and it goes, 300 knots and burns 8 gallons an hour. And, I mean, you got to figure out the mission that you want to use it for. And not every aircraft is designed for every mission.
No, it sure isn't. It sure isn't. So,
yeah. I got a seat for you here, Libby.
That, of course, the Air Force Special Operations Bubba's fly them now.
Oh, yeah.
And they did a really long range mission to go get a guy named Walton down in Africa. And they were refueling off of a C-130 that was being refueled off of a KC-135. And I mean, they went all the way down from, I think, Rhoda or Marone or something like that.
Yep.
I mean, it was a really long mission.
Marine Corps did something very similar in South Africa from, I think that they left from Sigonella or somewhere like that. And during Benghazi is a great example of, like that would have been a perfect mission set to get Marines.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Right on the beach, move right in.
Yeah. And we do have a lot of successful missions like that in 2022.
Yeah, and like I said, the Air Force moved down there real quick. Hey, sir.
Hey, how you doing?
Mark Hasara, call sign Sluggo.
Yeah.
Good to have you on, Glibby.
Yeah,
thanks for joining us, man.
I'm Glibby. Nice to meet you.
Thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah.
We're just talking about MOTS 1 a few minutes ago, and why don't you tell us first a little bit about yourself? I always ask everybody the same thing first, Glibby. How did you get your love for aviation? Where did it start, and what was the story behind it?
Well, I think the first real time that I was ever around military aviation is I saw the Blue Angels fly when I was a young kid. And at that same air show, I watched an F-16 when they were fairly new, rip around the pattern. And so I was just kind of enamored by it. Certainly watching the Blues fly and watching what the F-16 was doing. But I was convinced that I could never be a fighter pilot because I walked up and looked inside of an F-16 at that air show. And I was just like, oh, there's no way I'd fit in one of these things. Like, the F-16 cockpit's pretty tight. Yeah. But that's where it all kind of started.
Well, not only that, I think the real story that he doesn't tell is that he likes operating heavy machinery. When he was a kid, when he was like 13 years old, you got to tell him the Cornhusker or that machine that you're driving around in.
Well, my uncle, both my mom and dad's side of the family were farmers in Northeast Iowa, so I would go up there and work on the farm with them. So I, was able to run and operate, big tractors as a kid. And as a young kid, I detasseled corn to make some money during the summer. And they had an equipment operator that didn't show up for work one day. So when I was 13, they're like, does anyone know how to drive one of these things? And I'm like, yep, I do. So I got, I think, an extra 50 cents an hour. And instead of walking through corn rows and picking tassels, I got to drive this big stilted tractor that carried everybody. But yeah, that's kind of where my love started from.
I'm very familiar. I worked at Rockwell Collins in Cedar Rapids.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's right up my both Winthrop and Owine, Iowa is where my mom and dad's side of the family's from.
Yeah, I know where that's at, actually. Yeah, it was very interesting for a California surfer kid to go to all the corn stalks, corn as far as the eye could see,
That's right.
And all the big machinery. But you know what? The state fairs there were freaking incredible.
Absolutely. I spent a lot of time on both. My uncle had 6 boys that were all older, and they all raced hobby stock cars. So we spent many, Independence, different Cedar Rapids, different dirt racetracks as a kid there. So I went to many of those fairs up there.
So where did you go to school? Obviously,
I graduated from the University of Nebraska.
oh, Cornhusker, huh?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yep. And
Excellent.
then from there went through the PLC program in the Marine Corps, and uh, and then ended up flying F-18s for about the first 12 years.
Something like that.
12 years, and then jumped over to the F-35 program in 2010. Helped stand up our first RAG or RTU in Air Force parlance down at Eglin Air Force Base. Did that for 3 years, and then went out to 05 Command in Yuma of the Green Knights. Then did a lap through DC. Had a chance to work in Secretary Mattis's office for a couple years, and then back out. Ended up commanding out of MOTS 1 for 2.5 years.
So I stood up the KC-135 division of the Air Force Weapons School. Okay.
Oh, cool.
Those scars on my back are healing nicely. Okay.
Uh,
Because everybody's going, KC-135 Weapons School up, but we've been going for 25 years now. And actually we visited MOTS 1 when we were standing up to
Oh, did you? Okay.
yeah, we came down there. We sent a couple of our guys down there just to, see how you guys operated stuff. This was back in 2000 time frame. All right. So
Okay.
tell everybody what MOTS 1 is, what its mission is.
Mhm.
And Shrek and I were just talking about how operational test and MOTS 1 works together.
Yeah.
So explain what the school is and then how you at MOTS 1
Mhm.
dovetail with operational test and evaluation.
Well, to begin with, MOTS 1 Marine Aviation Weapons and Tactics Squadron 1 is a unit that was stood up in the late 70s to do advanced tactical training and advanced certifications for Marine aviators. So that's what they do, and they do that mission in a couple different ways. Primarily, they put on a semi-annual class called the Weapons and Tactics Instructor Course, or WTI, and that takes place every fall and spring in Yuma, Arizona. And we bring in every type model series from the Marine Corps. We bring in infantry units up to a battalion in different classes. We bring in artillery units. We bring in the whole command and control aspect of marine aviation. And we bring all these students together. And it's about 3 weeks of academics, followed by 4 weeks of a flight phase, where the flight phase builds from individual type model series, kind of a couple days of flying to kind of hone your skills there. But it very rapidly builds to large force exercise types things to include the whole command and control, which I think is unique to certainly the Marine Weapons School as you look at Top Gun or you look at the Air Force Weapons School. But we do that twice a year. And then when we're not doing that, we attend conferences. We do fleet support where we do advanced instructor certifications out of the fleet units. So we get the instructors at MOTS 1 get a chance to go all over the world and do fleet support, rub elbows with people in the fleet to see what's going on with them and have a chance to tell them what's coming down the pike. And that kind of dovetails into the relationship with VMX-1 and having operational tests right next door. And then, Shrek Squadron VMX or VMX proper gets the first look at what's coming next, whether it's software in an airplane, whether it's advanced capabilities. So our instructors would go over there and fly because MOTS 1 doesn't have any airplanes assigned to that unit. They all come from the fleet. But we would go over and fly with VMX-1 because they did have aircraft assigned. And that would give us the opportunity and our instructors the opportunity to see kind of what's coming next. So that as we're training the next instructors in the fleet, we can say not only is this the current recommendation for the machine that you're flying, but here's what's coming down the pike. We've flown it. We've seen it. Here's the things that we think how it will change our tactics and employment. So it was a very symbiotic relationship, and the individuals that made the decision to put the weapons school and operational tests right next door together, I think, had a lot of foresight, and it's turned out to be a great relationship.
And the Air Force kind of has the same deal where we have the 422nd tests.
Yep.
right there at Nellis with all of our wicks, and they really do work hand in hand. And the question I have is, we would sometimes get, particularly at our operational test and evaluation center, hey, I'm a combatant commander. Here's a problem I got.
Yep.
Would you guys get the same thing?
100%.
Yeah.
We would be, whether it's best employment practices given the certain operational constraints, whether it be technical questions on how to conduct mission planning to comply with whether it was ROE, whether it was, whatever operational constraint the fleet was seeing. We actually send at MOTS 1, anytime we have units that are deployed, whether it was, over to Syria or over to Iraq or Afghanistan, we send instructors over there to fly with the fleet units to make sure that not only do we bring the expertise from the weapons school instructor, but probably just as important, if not more important, then the instructor comes back to the building and says, this is actually what's happening today, so that the building, the weapons school can stay up to date of what the fleet is facing and the problems that they're trying to solve.
Dave Deptula sent us a message on how can we take JDAMs and sink ships. That was one of the questions we were asked once, and how can we take a bomb that's made for a stationary target and hit something moving? And we went through a lot of amazing stuff to figure it out with J stars and everything. But we did it with the Navy because, the Air Force had its program, and I asked all the Air Force bubbas when I got there, okay, have you guys talked to the Navy? I mean, they do sink ships, right? And they'll go, no, we haven't. Okay, well, let's talk about this and do a joint tactics demonstration, a JTD, which they did do. Okay. And again, that was with operational test working with, our weapons schools and everything. It was just a prime example of where he was the vice commander of PACAF at the time. He's like going, I need better capability of sinking ships with big bombs. And sure enough, we came up with a pretty good solution using JDAM and a weapon they're using a lot right now in the Red Sea, JSOW. Joint standoff weapons,
Yeah, if you just watch the news footage of, in fact, we saw that today. Like there goes the Super Hornet and what's under its wing. It wasn't JDAM.
Yeah, it was JSOWs. Yeah. I slowed that thing down and believe it or not, Libby, I have 10 cats and traps on 8 aircraft carriers, so I'm a tail hooker. I've been to tail hook twice now. 20th anniversary of OIF, they asked me to be on a panel with Mark Fox and some of the other CAGs and everything, because I was running all air refueling in the Middle East. I was the chief of the air refueling control team.
Okay.
And Stem Miguez, who was the Eisenhower battle group commander, and some of his commanders gave a phenomenal brief on what they were doing. And the weapon of choice was JSOW. Yeah. And so you're seeing a lot of JSOWs being used. And of course, they had what they called the murder Hornet with all the drones and everything flying around with 4 AIM-9X, 4 or 5 AMRAAMs, and of course the gun, holy smokes. Good stuff. Maybe both of you can talk about that, drones. That is a very new and unique threat. Just give me your thoughts on as pilots in a air-to-air situation going after a drone or a cruise missile, and what kind of target set that is, and maybe walk us through, hey, here's what I'm looking at when I'm doing that, either in the F-18 Hornet or in the F-35.
Yeah. You want to start? So the counter cruise missile problem has been studied and practiced for some time in the fighter community. Certainly, as we have progressed in the technology of our radars that are on board, whether you're talking APG-79 and the Super Hornet, APG-81 and the F-35, certainly the F-22, all of those airplanes, certainly have capability against those targets. But the issue is one, finding them, because those typically are down low. And two is then going to be, do you have enough weapons to knock down the whole covey of cruise missiles or not? That's the real issue. Once you find them, they're not hard to knock down, assuming that you have the weapons to do it. That's why you see the loadouts of the Super Hornets that you were just referencing. Drones are a little bit different issue, simply because there's such a broad spectrum of capability, size. Think of U.S. systems from Global Hawk all the way down to these almost look like paper airplanes that infantry launch out of their backpack. And we've seen lots of footage from, Ukraine and what's going on over there with how effective drones have been. So I think from the fighter community, we tend to look at the drone problem more on the higher, larger size. And we treat those just like we will an aircraft. But at some point, there's got to be a line that's snapped in the sand where, shooting an X $100,000 missile at a $300 drone, what's the cost benefit there? And do we need to come up with other ways to defend against kind of the smaller ones? I know that there's been a lot of work done in the electromagnetic spectrum of how to deny service to these things, as being one example of how to defeat them or degrade them. But it's a real problem, and I think it's a problem that's only going to get more broad in its complexity and its common out. You're going to run into this issue much more often, and so I think that a lot of thought and a lot of capability needs to be developed as we continue to see that threat to U.S. forces expand.
Yeah,
it's only going to get worse, I think.
Yeah, you're seeing it right now in Yemen, right? I mean, we're launching guys off the boat loaded with, and just like Glibby said, you're killing a $5 target with $1 million weapon, and eventually we're going to run out of missiles, and they're not going to run out of drones. And so when you look at the counter drone threat, I think that you're definitely going to look into the EW spectrum, and you're going to look into cyber warfare more than you are with a kinetic capability. And shooting one with a gun is extremely difficult. I mean, they're very small. They're going to slow way down. You're going to have an extreme closure rate, and trying to hit one of those things without you running into it is going to be very difficult. Or the ground, yeah.
Yeah, or at night.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think that the drone threat is a real thing, but I would argue that I think that the drone threat, as far as drone to aircraft, like a drone, when I go out in my F-18 and we're fighting, I don't know that I'm as concerned about me hitting a drone. I'm worried about a drone hitting the ship, right?
Yeah.
Like that's what they're doing in Yemen. And that's where that latest shoot down, that Hornet, I don't know if you saw the news about the guys that punched out of the Hornet that almost got shot down by our own friendlies.
Yeah, Ward Carroll covered it in a show. I don't know if you know about Ward Mooch Carroll.
Yeah, so now, and I used to say that all the time, day one, wave one, we're all lined up is a much different story than day one, wave two, when we're all like this, and now you're trying to determine friend and foe. Now that never should have happened with the interrogation capabilities that the boat should have, and the identification capabilities that the aircraft should have. That was obviously a mistake. But in the same vein, we're shooting very expensive missiles off the boat to go knock down these, not even $1,000 drones that can create a lot of hate and discontent, So that's something, and we worked on that a lot at VMX, was not as much countering the drone threat as much as how do we fly in the same airspace as our own drones? Because the Marine Corps at the time, and still today, is trying to move aviation assets, drones, depending on the size, to the ground units and giving the ground commanders the ability to launch these things. Well, now all of a sudden you've got a piece of metal flying in the same piece of sky as a Cobra, a Huey, a V-22, a 53, and you hit one of those things and game's over.
Yeah.
Even one of our own.
Who's doing the coordination?
And so one of the things that we tried to do while I was at VMX was, and I was in the back, I was in the side of a Huey, and I was in a Cobra, and we're like, all right, we went out and the drones, it was pretty interesting because we took it from the civilian world. Well, we actually wrote the pub, and then the civilian world took it to the civilian world on integration of drones in aviation, in airspace, how to do it. And it's not very malleable. It's not easy to do because the guys on the deck who are controlling the drones are not talking to everybody in the air. And so you don't necessarily have like ATC control or anything like that where you'd have someone controlling, okay, you're approved up to whatever altitude. So you have to come up with sort of, cookie cutter things that you give the grunts. And you're like, hey, this is the airspace. This is the area you're allowed to fly your drone in. And we're going to stay out of that area until the forward air controller or the air officer says all the drones are on the deck. That's the friendly drone side.
Yeah.
The enemy drone side, I think we've already hammered that one flat, but that's a very difficult mission set to work out.
Yeah.
Think about when Iran launched all those drones to Israel. We integrated with the Israelis and we're shooting down drones with our aircraft, our surface boats, and they're shooting them down, with their Iron Dome. And I mean, I could only imagine the difficulty and integration that you're going to have there when one makes it through. And now you got a friendly on this side, an enemy on this side, and a weapon system over here.
The battlefield's not linear anymore.
No, it is definitely not a linear battlefield. And that's what I'm talking about. Day one, wave one is easy to figure out. Day one, wave 1.5 is this. And now we're trying to determine friend info and do all that other stuff. So, yeah, it's definitely a difficult mission set. And I think that as you look at the EW side of it and the cyber side of it, that's probably where you're going to find the most benefit and the best ways to knock those things out of the sky.
CENTCOM showed something on X last week. Air Force F-16 use, I'm going to get this wrong, but it's the laser guided 2.75 rocket. APWK, I think is what it's called.
AWS.
Okay.
Advanced Precision Kill Weapon System. Yeah.
They used one of those on a drone.
Yeah.
It's the first time it ever been done. Okay. And that was the big thing that they were talking about was we've now found a way to not use $1 million missile on a $600 drone.
Yeah.
And I have no idea the cost of these 2.75 rockets. Obviously, it's a small warhead, but the sniper pod slave to the radar took the thing out. They fired the rocket at it and it went right to it based on the laser dot on the drone, and
right.
they had the video.
And the interesting thing is that those drones are often going so slow that they're almost operating in what we call the notch, where it's difficult for your radar unless you've got a lot of closure on it to find out where it is on your radar. Where a forward-looking infrared, lightning pod or a lantern, or a sniper pod might have a better chance to find it. In the F-35, we've got a FLIR and EOTS on the front, and we use that often. And so people go, if we want to turn our radars off, or they're going to turn their radars off, or they're going to try and sneak around, you can find a lot with that thing, and that's probably going to be your best advantage because they can't hide their heat signature very well. These things are two-stroke motors or whatever, and they are little bright shiny objects in that infrared spectrum. That's a great example of ingenuity in it, and we can put a ton of those 2.75 inch units on the.
A lot cheaper than SM2.
Yeah.
And I've seen them on your helicopters, obviously. Particularly the laser guided ones, the precision guided ones, and there's all kinds of videos out there, of some ISIS leader on like his bike getting smacked by one of these things.
That's the beauty of them, is that they're precise, but at the same time they're relatively low yield.
Yeah.
your collateral damage in an urban environment is relatively low.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Compared to a 500-pound JDAM or,
A laser Maverick or a
GBU 12
or a Hellfire. I mean, that was our big in Ramadi. That was the number one issue was collateral damage. I think I talked about that a little bit before, but
you did.
we didn't have 2.75 inch APKWS back then, and and when you shoot one that's unguided, it ain't a death dot. When you shoot a Zuni, a 5-inch Zuni rocket, it's a Mach 2 death dot. It's going right where you put it.
Yeah.
You put the thing on the thing and push the thing, and it hits the thing. I remember doing FAC A once with pop, roll in, and I'm like, here's stand by for the mark, boom, shoot the mark. I turn around, I look back, and I'm like, it blew up the thing that I was shooting at. I was like, oh, just hit the mark, whatever. The squirters over. Really blew up the target. But yeah.
Hey, let's jump into Ramadi. We talked a little bit about that.
I think right now is a good time. I'd like to hit. You wanted to talk about 5th gen stuff. Can we do that?
Yes,
right now?
let's do that. Let's do that.
Because it's funny because today, like just out of the blue, we're talking about 6th gen and what does that mean? And F-47 is just hot on the street. And Steve and I were both talking about that today. Like, what does that mean? And I think I'd like it'd be great if you opened it up with what you were talking about with the stealth.
So here's what I texted him. Okay, I asked Shrek the question. I said, "Hey, you've both flown 5th gen fighters.
Right.
If you were king for a day, what would you have in your 6th gen fighter? Obviously, aviate, navigate, communicate. All those things that you have to have, but weapon systems, sensors, all those other things that you'd have to include in making a 6th gen fighter, not just stealth capabilities, but also engines and everything. Give me your opinion on, okay, maybe I'm king for a day and I'm told create a 6th gen fighter. What would it look like?
Yeah. So I think to begin with, let's talk about where we are, and then it'll make more sense if we talk about where we want to go. So the jump from we grew up flying the F-18 to now the F-35 or just 5th gen. So the thing that makes that different is, first off, is just the hardware on the airplane. So if you can think about what your cell phone was like in the year 2000, it could make a phone call. It was a little bit big, but it could do the basic stuff. And then fast forward to, when the iPhone came out, now all of a sudden, I can text, I can send email. Then all of a sudden, a little bit later on, it's like I'm surfing the internet. Basically, it's a full-blown computer walking around in your pocket now. So very similar in that the sensors of the hardware on the airplane, specifically to the F-35, the APG-81, the EW systems, the amount of processing power. In a very RF dense environment, you have to have a lot of computing power that can measure, can analyze, and then simply display to the pilot what the environment's in. And if you really had to nail down what makes 5th gen kind of different, it's you ask the pilot, do you want to go fast? Do you want to carry a lot of weapons? Do you want to be able to turn really good? Do you want all of these different aspects that people generally attribute to making a good fighter airplane? The number one thing that I would say, and I heard a colleague of mine, his name's Chip Burke, Dave Burke. He was a F-18 Top Gun instructor, F-22 exchange guy, F-35 CO at the RAG with me. He would say the number one thing that you want is King Kong situational SA. Mm-hmm. If you know what's in the environment, you can fight the environment. It's all these unknowns when they pop up, which tend to surprise people. And so that would be, I would agree with him. My number one thing is you want situational awareness to the battlefield that you're on, whether it's a surface air missile that comes on air, whether it's a group of fighters, a covey of cruise missiles, whatever the case may be, you want to know what's in the environment. And so that's where we're at now. And the F-35, F-22 certainly do that very, very well. The sensors, the way that the information is displayed. And one next step that the F-35 does as well is that not only does it tell you what's in the environment, but when you tell it what's important to you in that environment, it automatically tasks all these sensors to go out and get more information on the thing that you said is important. So, as an F-18 guy, you had to mechanically run the radar. You had to keep an eye on your RWR, your radar warning receiver. You had to listen to AIC, and you had to do all these things. And you were the one that had to put it all together in your head about what the environment had. And it took a long time to be able to get good at doing that. Lots of reps. You see guys that come out of the RAG right now in the F-35, and they're making independent decisions, and it's amazing how good they are as very young people in the fleet operating that machine. So that's kind of, and then the last piece is like, well, it's kind of unfair in a bar fight if nobody sees you and you can walk up and punch anybody in the face and they don't see it coming. So, the stealth aspect is certainly, was a big eye opener to me when I started flying the F-35. You started trying to solve tactical problems, whether it was doing suppression of enemy air defense or doing the air-to-air thing. You could just go and do a lot of things that, an F-18 couldn't. So that's kind of where we're at right now. And then if we fast forward and say, okay, well, what do we want in the future? I don't think you can talk to the future airplane without also talking about future weapons. So, take any adversary in the world that might not be very friendly with the United States. They're developing both airplanes that can go higher, faster. They're developing air-to-air missile systems, air-to-surface missile systems that go higher, faster. Certainly Ukraine has brought on in kind of the common parlance of weapons that travel over, Mach 5. So these hypersonics and how difficult it is of a problem to solve with those. So as we look to the future, I think that you still need to have a refinement and a continued advancement of that hardware, sensors, and software that give you SA to the environment, because the electronic attack environment keeps getting more and more complex. So you still need something that's cutting edge that can cut through all that noise and still give you truth data of the environment that you're in. The second thing, when you start talking stealth, you want to make sure that, the stealth airplane that you're flying is stealthy to all sorts of sensors out there, whether it be visually, whether it be the IR spectrum, whether it be the RF spectrum. So you want a airplane that, broadly speaking, can deny detection from early warning radars to sector radars to fire control radars to, even potentially millimeter wave or active radars that are on missiles. So all of those things I think are going to be important for the next gen airplane. I think that from a kinematic standpoint, you're going to want something more like the F-22 so that somebody can super cruise, somebody can get really high, really fast, and be able to chuck whether air-to-air or surface-to-air weapons a long distance, because the adversary's weapon systems are going to be able to do the same. And then the last thing I think that you have to look at is numbers matter. So you can't build this exquisite airplane that we have 5 of and expect it to go shoot down 2,500 airplanes in the Straits of Taiwan. So it needs to be affordable. And you need to balance everything that I just said, because it's not about the money, it's all about the money. But you need to have a sufficient number. I mean, I think that if you ask any ACC commander, like, how many F-22s do you want? I guarantee you most of them would say more than 173.
More than that. And I want more than that.
Yeah. So I think you need to balance all the capability that I said was something that, we don't build the requirements that are so exquisite that it's going to cost you $500 million to make one. I don't know. That's my thought.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head straight across the board. I think, some of the other things that I'd want in a 6th gen capability, and this kind of goes back to one of the things that I talked about, also along with what Steve was talking about, but the ability to be able to conduct cyber warfare, to to be able to
Oh,
do
yeah.
some other things that, operating in the full spectrum. So not only the kinetic spectrum, but being able to do other things in the cyber warfare spectrum is something that I would look towards in a 6th-gen fighter. And we already kind of hit on the fact, the F-35 was designed to defeat a specific mission set, a specific threat. And as we look at the 6th-gen fighter, it is going to be a much wider threat that it's going to be able to deny detection to. And I think that that's very important as well.
And I think definitely AI will play a big factor in the future as well, because right now this in the F-35, the system that I talked about that says you just tell it what's important and it gets the information. That's what they call sensor fusion in the F-35 world. I think the next step of that is it's just going to automatically go get that for you without you even saying what's important, so that you can just try to absorb the environment. Like, I think that there's going to be the ease of interpreting this complex environment is going to be an aspect of a 6th-gen airplane that will build upon what we have now, that I think will be very important, because it's going to get even more complex with drones, unmanned systems, enemy fighters, surface air missiles. Like, all that stuff is going to make it more complex, and you're going to have software in the airplane that's going to dumb that all down and present it to you in a very simple way of, hey, you need to take care of this right now, or else it's going to take care of you.
And when you put loyal wingmen into the mix, which we did some testing with at VMX, we actually flew in formation with drones with, I forget which one it was, but the Navy had one that we were flying with up there in the 2508. But now you start talking about incorporating other aircraft that are unmanned possibly into your decision making
and
formations. And so now we've got these loyal wingmen, and so
they can go jump on the grenade.
They can go jump on the grenade. No chaff, no flare is better than a dumb wingman. But or they can get those guys turning on and looking, and so that we can find them and stuff like that. But yeah, I think it'll be very impressive. I'm excited to see what this thing can do.
I am too. Hey, I worked at Rockwell, as I told Shrek, Rockwell Collins in Cedar Rapids. And I got to write the cockpit white paper with another F-117 guy for the B-21 Raider. One of the requirements was optionally manned. Give me your thoughts on a 6th-gen fighter being optionally manned, either AI or a human sitting in the seat.
Yeah, I'd like to jump on that one. I mean, it's funny because both of us now are in the flying for FedEx and doing our thing, and there's a lot of discussion about single piloted aircraft, and then no one's in the aircraft, and
oh yeah,
and I keep hitting on this. I'm sorry, but the vulnerability of a cyber threat inside of an unmanned aircraft is a real deal, and we do everything we can to keep the aircraft away from the network, and I could only imagine the how difficult it would be to truly keep all of these drones, these unmanned aircraft, away from a cyber attack of some sort. The first time that, I mean, I don't know, it happens to us all the time. We got the autopilot on, it's supposed to do something, and you're like, what's it doing? And it messes up. I think optionally manned is I don't know that we would go to a fully unmanned fighter community in my lifetime, and probably not in my son's lifetime. Eventually it might get there. But being able to ensure the security of that platform is the biggest threat. Because if they get hacked and someone jumps into that cockpit that is not friendly, well, then you got a big problem, and you don't necessarily need to touch the network to hack people today. So it's I think that's going to be a difficult circle to square, if you will. But
We,
with AI and
Yeah,
I mean, I think that the capability is going to be there pretty soon.
and I think your sixth gen airplane. I talked about cost earlier. Like those aren't going to be cheap.
yeah.
I think that we need numbers, but they're not going to be cheap. So I think and I'm speculating, but I would say that you would see those more as the quarterback, manned quarterback, and then some less expensive, higher replicated, higher number unmanned system, kind of being quarterbacked or controlled by a very sophisticated, expensive, and highly capable. Is having somebody close to the leading edge is important because the closer you get, the more truth data you have, as a general statement.
Something along the lines of the NGAD airplane flying, the sixth gen flying and trying to, as General Jumper used to say, kick in the door and then have like the F-15EX like right behind it coming in with,
Well, not necessarily. I think what we're talking about is a sixth gen aircraft having unmanned aircraft kick in the door,
got it.
the hornet's nest, because now they're gonna have to turn on their systems. They're gonna have to become visible, if you will, as they start fighting those other aircraft, and the picture will start to develop better because now we're kind of hanging back as the quarterback. Often, today we do something very similar with manned aircraft out in front of us. We can't carry as many weapons as there are targets. So we might put 4 Hornets, 4th-gen fighters out in front of us that have plenty of weapons, and we quarterback them. And the radar in this thing is unbelievable. The situational awareness in the F-35 is truly amazing. And when you turn the corner, and even when you're going the opposite way and you got a friendly turn downrange, you have literally practically complete situational awareness. So you drop targets for the guys in front of you to shoot. They shoot them and leave, and we just keep quarterbacking them. And then they turn back in. We shoot at the first leading edge. They turn around, and so the whole time we're just quarterbacking manned aircraft. And I think what Steve's getting at is now, rather than manned aircraft, we send something downrange that is unmanned and has AI on board and knows, okay, well, just like you said, you take this fusion piece, you give it to AI, and it goes, oh, well, that's the most, based on what you told me, that's the one I need to shoot. And then it shoots it. And maybe it turns around, maybe it keeps going. It all depends on the situation. But in that case, now your Eagle guys you might put the Eagles out in front and have them shoot and run away. And then the drones go next. It all depends on how they're going to end up doing it. But in the end, your sixth-gen fighter is going to be in the Muranosphere and have complete SA of everything that's going on. I mean, sometimes, you don't even need AIC. Our last flight that we flew together, we literally put the guys that we were fighting behind us at 25 miles, and we were going the opposite direction. And we'd say, okay, fight's on. And literally turn the corner and be like, oh, there's one here, one there. Okay, I got that guy. I got this guy. You got that guy. Boop. And then we'd make them stay alive so we could come up behind them and slit their throat. That's so boring. We started telling them where we were. It's like, hey, look down. I'm right underneath you, underneath the chocolate. You see the chocolate drop?
I'm going to punch you in the face and you can't stop me.
That's it. But I mean, I think that's what you're getting after, right?
Yeah, and the quarterback, not necessarily manned, but unmanned, loyal wingman, whatever. There's a bunch of terms floating around right now about what those unmanned aircraft are called, but they're basically being controlled by a very sophisticated manned aircraft. And everybody, to include the unmanned and the manned aircraft, can have the ability to trespass inside these traditional lines of surface-to-air missiles, and then go in and start stirring up the hornet's nest, make everything turn on, and now you're like, oh, you're there, you're there, you're there. Okay, and now whether it's more drones, whether it's a fifth gen comes in,
Fourth gen comes in.
Fourth gen comes in. Like there's all sorts of options, but the key to the whole thing is getting real time intelligence of where these things are, and then very quickly being able to say, okay, I'm moving you off the battlefield, you're off the battlefield, and now all of a sudden this impenetrable wall of surface-to-air missiles that, you know, if you cross this line, it's a death ring. Now doesn't seem as big and bad.
I mean, back in the day when we were young guys together in 232, a strike package might include prowlers behind you, you know, Harriers that you're leading in, you know, so that they can do the attack piece. You're going to be the fighter sweep. Somebody's got to protect the HAVA, the high value asset, so that they can keep, you know, jamming and doing the things that they're doing back there with their lightning bolts and magic. And we've taken all of that and put it into one aircraft. And we've, what would normally be an extremely difficult situation to digest, you know, in a single seat aircraft, sitting there with your little spider card drawn out. Okay, he said that this
bullseye cuts.
Yeah, like, oh shit, I got that in the wrong one. My ink ran out. Damn it, you know. And then
at night,
look
at
it on NVGs with your little lip light.
you got a little light on your finger because we didn't have NVG capable cockpits, and you know, we've taken all that already and boilerplated it into one aircraft that does it way better than any of those aircraft combined could do it back in the day. You know, so only in, what is that, 20 years or so.
Years.
Yeah, it went from having a huge strike package with all these different type aircraft to being able to do it with really one aircraft, but you bring in other ones just to have more ordnance on the target. But just like you said, once you take down that surface air missile threat, all of a sudden we have air supremacy and the game's over for them. You know,
absolutely.
On top of them, punch them in the face.
Yeah. And there's so many examples of that now. You know,
I thoroughly believe, hands down, if we had sent F-35s over to help Ukraine fight the Russians, that war would have been over in less than a week. I mean, we would have taken out every single one of their SAMs, destroyed all of those vehicles. It would have been done quickly, just because the capability and, you know, the way that aircraft was designed to fight that fight. Like, that was the fight for that. That was what that airplane was designed for.
And you know, I've seen so many videos, one in particular put out by Northrop Grumman, where they're watching like a HIMARS system shoot, and the F-35 locks right onto it. I mean, the missiles aren't even 50 meters out of the box. Well, and the F-35 is going, okay, there it is. Okay, here's what I'm going to do with it. Okay, here's how I'm going to attack it.
Well, and now let's couple this loyal wingman idea with TLAMs or Tomahawks off the boat or HIMARS, like GPS HIMARS, right? They're shooting from way, way away. And now you go out there, you find the targets. We don't even have anybody else airborne except for 8 F-35s. And you're like, bink, 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 found you. We turn around, we never shoot a shot. And all of a sudden, you know, your Tomahawks, your TLAMs, your JSOW, your whatever else come in. Some of it's launched from the ground. Some of it's launched from other aircraft. But we found you, and the game's over. And you know, we did that testing. We did that testing at Mott's, and we did it during WTI. We go out there and we drop a Link 16 track on a target and have the HIMARS and hit it. So, I mean, and that's kind of getting back to what I was talking about with putting the A to the G. Like, how do we take this, you know, this exquisite aircraft and push all of that situational awareness down to other entities that can then use the information for decision making and targeting.
Yeah. Amazing stuff. Hey, just so you guys know, we took a 787 cockpit and basically missionized it for the B-21.
Really?
Yeah. We took all the hardware out of a 787 cockpit and said to include heads-up guidance system, At that time, Rockwell made the F-35 helmet, and we actually had a cheaper version of it that had 95% of the capability, but not the whole price and everything. And it wasn't NVG capable. Okay. It was only 95K. And
That's about a quarter of the price.
yeah, exactly. Steve, that's why we did this. Okay. Because there was a lot of countries that couldn't afford that kind of helmet that wanted that capability. And we said, okay, well, if we take the Jehemics and do this, what can we come up with? And again, it had about 95% of the capability. And that was the helmet that the B-21 guys were going to wear.
Nice.
And it was
Cool.
literally a 787 cockpit with the little funky knobby hand controller and everything.
Yeah.
And I think it was 5 screens across, but we told them that we could make it one piece of glass, which they loved. Okay. And you guys will love this. We had a MFD/display laboratory and a museum for avionics and MFDs and everything at Rockwell Collins in our main building. We figured out how to create a 3D flat screen.
What? What in the world is a 3D flat screen?
The flat screen actually shows you everything in 3D.
Man,
Okay.
That's awesome.
I think there are a lot of uses for that.
Well, you know what? Here's the funny thing, Shrek. I took a Army general in there one day, and they were looking at new MFDs for their helicopters. Okay. And Sharp made the thing for us. Okay. And I can't go into the particulars on how we figured it out, but we figured it out to where there was 7 pieces of glass and each one was its own screen. Okay. And we ran World of Warcraft on it. All right. And so you see, all the little aliens fighting each other. Okay. But they're fighting in 3D.
Oh, that's cool.
And I remrember
Did you guys have like
see that.
Did you have like a red glass and a blue glass or something like that?
No, we didn't need it. No, that's the other crazy thing about this was you didn't need to have glasses on. Okay. You did not need any type of external glasses on your face. It was 3D on the display. Okay. And we ran World of Warcraft on it. Okay. And it just looped. Okay. And everybody would come in and a lot of people would go, I play World of Warcraft. Where can I buy one of these and bring it home? Okay.
I'm sure it's not cheap.
If it was a Marine, he would have been like, "Hey, what's that over there?"
Well,
what? Don't look over here.
The cool thing was it was a 60-inch screen.
Oh,
so
wow.
It was big. It was big. And you talk about an engineer that has no essay on what it could be used for. And he actually said that to this general. He goes, "This is one of our capabilities. It's really cool and everything like that. I don't know what you guys will use it for." And the general looked at him like, "You're kidding me, right?" And he goes, "No." He goes, and so obviously I'm sitting there, and I spent a lot of time, Steve, in the KAOC at Prince Sultan for Anaconda and for Shock and Awe.
Yep.
And I said, "General, imagine you having a 3D screen in your helicopters with a 360-degree look, 3D all the way around, targeting, all this kind of stuff, And then the guy that was running the museum, and he was one of our chief designers of our MFDs, goes, "Well, yeah, I guess you could do that." Okay, whatever.
Yeah. Well, that's where the engineers. That's another thing that operational test does. Is it's like,
yeah,
you mean it does this too? And they're like, yeah. Well, yeah, we wanted to do that. Oh, really? It wasn't in the requirements, and it didn't. Whatever. And you're like, no. Let's open this up.
And see, again, like you said, operational test and evaluation, and these guys figured out how to do it, and it was an incredibly common. Nobody would think, like we used to say, it must be inspiration from God, because none of us would have thought of it.
Yeah, right.
Right. And he found a common way that they do things that allowed each of the 7 screens to be its own separate screen, so that everything was 3-dimensional on 7 pieces of glass.
Yeah.
So imagine having something like that in your cockpit on a flat screen, on a long screen, like in your F-35. You can partition where literally you have a 3-dimensional God, God's eye view, or 360, just whatever you want.
It'd be good as the fighter got closer to get bigger in your face. You'd be like, oh God.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have to worry about figuring out where the range is.
No. And that was one of the other things too, is you could zoom in and zoom out on everything too, and
great for SAR mapping. It'd be great for a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. The
targeting pods.
well, you wanted to talk about Ramadi.
Yeah.
What I'll tell you is that Steve got to fly during Phantom Fury. He was in 242 and got to do a lot of close air support during the Battle of Fallujah. The second one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you got 2 guys, one Ramadi.
Fall of 2000.
Yeah, I was in Ramadi in 05, 06 time frame when we were winning the war, and he was the guy that got to go in, and you might want to tell him a little bit about that, rearming and reloading and going back out. And
so let's finish with you talking about Ramadi. We were talking about you being a ground fac and some of the things that you were doing there. All right. And I think where we left off was you guys were realizing that you had to, let me see if I can remember this right. You were introducing some new tactics and new ways of doing things, because, here you are in this urban fight, and you said it was really small. Okay. And, how do you bring in artillery and not bring down the whole block and things
you
like
didn't
that?
bring in artillery. We were lobbing our own mortars, which was not, we weren't supposed to be doing that, but we were lobbing our own mortars in the city occasionally. But for the most part, you needed precision and accuracy. And I think what I was getting after was like, we went from the Fallujah model where, like, hey, there's a bad guy in that building, building goes away, to, hey, there's a bad guy in the 4th window on the, second deck. We need that to go away, just that, because the collateral damage, the ROE changed significantly after Fallujah. I don't know. Do you remember what your CD estimate was? Like how many? I think it was 10.
Yeah, I was gonna say it was in the late 2000s.
Yeah, in the early 2000s, right? Like 2004. When we went in originally, it was like 20. They told us you can't get more than 20 civilians. I'm like, what? We're not going to do that. But I think in Fallujah, I don't know what it was, but I remember when I first was getting ready to go to Ramadi, the CivCAS, the requirement for the highest level of approval to conduct a strike, unless you were in troops in contact situation, went from 10 to 1. So we were in a situation where the public was done with Fallujah. They didn't, the appetite for total annihilation of cities had gone, and the president wasn't willing to accept it. So they ratcheted up the rules of engagement, and so you'd find yourself in these situations where, I think what we were talking about, I might have told the story about I don't know if I told the story about the division air officer. I'll leave his name out of it. When I checked in, he was like, you're not going to do any air delivered ordnance. You're not going to do any facts. So just go learn how to be a watch officer. And 6 hours into getting on the hooks, I was like, well, I read all the rules of engagement and the collateral damage, and that's a bad guy, and I think that we can kill him. And it was with, oh gosh, who was it there? It was no, not 312. Anyway, it was a Hornet squadron, and it was Tobias Van Esselstein was flying, and I was like, hey, we need to put a laser Maverick on that truck. Let me see if I can get approval. And the second brigade combat team commander, his Iron 6, I didn't know he's listening to my frequency. He hears everything that's going on. I'm like, hey, we're troops in contact. These guys were just laying IEDs all over the place. We just watched them put more in the back of their rig. We want to take them out. Stand by. I'm going to gin up a 9-line. I need to get approval. And before I did anything, Iron 6 comes on the radio and he goes, Shrek, this is Iron 6. That mission is approved. Then we launched a laser Maverick in and took out the first vehicle in the city in quite a long time. I mean, they hadn't done any casts in Ramadi in a long, long time. So that's when we kind of realized, like, we're literally fighting in a phone booth. And you can't just drop 500-pound bombs because you're going to kill friendlies and you have a potential to kill, civilians. And we didn't know the city at the first, but as we got to know the city, we knew the buildings that were abandoned. We knew buildings that had people in them at certain times. I'll never forget Lieutenant Colonel Turner. We were taking fire from a heavy machine gun position from the south of the government center. And I ginned up a 9-line. I look over at him. I was like, hey, can we do this one, sir? And for the most part, he would throw it to me and be like, is it good? And I'd say yes. And he goes, no, we can't do that when there are civilians in the building at this time of day. And so we knew we learned the area of operations very well. We understood what was going on, and really what was going on. And I think I told you this part of the story was, the people who lived in the city had invited the insurgents in and couldn't get them out. And so these insurgents would come in, and the people in the city figured out that we were going to strafe them, shoot a laser Maverick at them, shoot a tow missile, shoot a Hellfire. We were going to get them. So I swear, I think they started sending them to these abandoned buildings, and it was a little bit of a turkey shoot. Even though, well, I think I told you this, our farthest employment was 180 meters. And that was with a 500-pound bomb, and our closest was 55 with a Hellfire missile. And I think I might have told you that story about.
Yeah, you did.
Metro came up on the radio and he said, nothing closer, that's it. He started yelling at me on the radio. But it was very difficult. And so really, I didn't necessarily develop new tactics. I used the tactics that we had in place, but did a ton of prior planning so that I literally, I kind of went out of the box a little bit and went to Intel, and I was like, I want a line of sight study to every building that can see any of our buildings. And so they're able to take the building here and lay a map over it, and every building that could see that building would have red on it. And so Piss Off was brand new at the time, and I'd take Piss Off, which is Precision Strike Suite software, and I'd drop targets on every single one of those buildings. And once we got the targeting, as we continued to develop this targeting pack, I would send it to all the Marine squadrons. And so the Marines knew Ramadi like the back of their hand, like Sumo and the guys. Anytime any of the new squadrons came in, they'd wake me up and be like, hey, give me a tour around the city. Like, all right, start over here. We'd walk down and they'd have their pod out and they'd walk it all over the city. And I'd be like, we take fire from here, here, here. So they knew that area of operations. And it was a significant advantage I had because we were in the defense. Even though we were in the defense taking rounds every day, we were able to build a fire plan that supported our defense, if you will. And so I didn't necessarily develop any new tactics. We used what was existing, and the GRGs at the time were all over the place. I standardized those with the MAPS guys at the MEF. Like, no, we need it like this, and guys would lay down. What was the planning tool that we had at the time? It wasn't PFPS, but Falcon View. Mm-hmm. They lay down their Falcon View, and if they didn't have the right date on their Falcon View image, the line wouldn't line up on like the road, for example. And so we came up with a standard set to use for the GRGs. It's for the gridded reference graphics. Mm-hmm. And with the gridded reference graphics, you could say we dialed that in, and that was something that I developed with the Intel guys while we were there. I was like, okay, cool. So we're going to sector the whole area out, and we've got the roads named. But then I can go, hey, go to checkpoint 295, go north, and you're going to see Alpha 8. inside Alpha 8, I want you to hit building 64. Put your pod down there. And then now they've got a map and they go, okay, there's that. But okay, that looks like what he's talking about. And oh, by the way, I give them a 10-digit grid with elevation. And so their pod should be looking at that already.
Yeah.
Now they zoom out a little bit and they're like, okay, there's the turn in the road. Okay, I got the building. And so we were able to significantly reduce the time to kill and increase the situational awareness of the pilots, both helos and jet pilots, as to where, we would have employments. I mean, it came to the point where I had to hide the jets out of earshot so that, I told my opso once, he's like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm setting up an aerial ambush because if we fly the jet over here, they're going to run away. So we want to kill them. We don't want them to run away. So, those were the type of things that we did at the time, and it really worked out well. And, we had 0 civcasts. I did get in trouble for, blowing up some stuff, but my jag, my jag came in once. Brian was his first name. He came in and he's like, God, Shrek, I just had to dole out $100,000 a day because of something you blew up. I'm like, what was it? He goes, it wasn't one thing. Some guy brought in a melted TV. Like they bring in all this stuff. I'm sure that it's happened somewhere else, but they blame it on me. You know what I mean? But yeah, Ramadi was that was a very interesting time. I mean, it was as a captain in the Marine Corps. I mean, I look back on that time and think, man, I had more responsibility then than I ever did. 1,500 Marines, a battalion commander who believed in me and don't let me do what we needed to win that fight.
Hey, Shrek, move over towards Steve just a little bit. You're right on the edge of the screen.
Okay, there you
go. Just a tad more. Good.
But
so that's, and see, that is some of the stories that you didn't hear in the news, man. And like you said, people were sick because of what happened in Fallujah the first time. So Steve, talk about the second Battle of Fallujah that you were involved with. First, just give the background based on, hey, the first Battle of Fallujah, what happened and why we had to go back in the second time, and how that and what was that outcome?
Yeah, I won't go into too much detail in the first one because I wasn't there. I mean, everybody can read the same thing I can read. I know people that were there, but it was an attempt to clear the city that didn't go well. I'll just leave it at that. And so planning went on for several months. So I want to say that the first one happened in the spring of 2004, early summer of 2004. A lot of planning. The division air officer, static claim, got all of us together from the different squadrons, whether they were helo squadrons or jet squadrons. We were based primarily out of Al-Assad in Iraq, just west of about 75, 80 miles. We came up with a game plan. Let me rephrase that. Static came up with a game plan, brought all the different air officers, brought all the different pilot training officers in, briefed them on what the game plan was going to be, what the ground scheme maneuver was, and how we were going to ensure that we were effective, but at the same time, only prosecuting enemy combatants and not each other. As you can imagine, there was a lot of U.S. forces, Army, Marine Corps, Marine aviation assets. There was Air Force coming from down south, as well as Balad. And then, there's even Navy jets off the boat. So bottom line is there was a lot of assets in a very small piece of ground, a very small piece of sky surrounding that town. But it was, the ops tempo that the ground combat element prosecuted was very robust. I mean, they cleared the city very quickly, and so you would fly missions, and our standard loadout was you'd have a couple GBU-12s, a GBU-38, a 500-pound JDAM, the gun, a targeting pod. Sometimes we'd carry, usually flight leads would carry 8 5-inch rockets, and you would Winchester your wingman and send him home and within 10 minutes, the lead would Winchester go home, and you would literally land. They would have the next round of ordnance waiting on the ramp, and as soon as you shut down, it would all go up. They're tossing water bottles up at you, and you were starting back up within 15 minutes and going right back out.
And Winchester meaning you're out of ammo. You dropped all your bombs.
So
and shot all your bullets. I mean, you were just empty.
Yeah. And so it happened very fast. I mean, the facts on the ground did a great job. A lot of times at their own risk, but they did a great job. The plan was very simple, very executable, and so my hat's off to the people that did that planning.
That's where the keyhole template was developed.
Yeah.
So
Static Kling, Gary Kling, former F-18 MOTS instructor, was the division air officer, and it was very fast paced. I was glad to be, I was lucky to be a part of it, but I was just a very, very small piece in this very large cog of a machine.
Yeah, Static came up with what is now used all over the place, and like 9.7 times out of 10, you're going to get a keyhole cast. And keyhole cast, I think that's where it was developed, was in Fallujah. And they had a keyhole template over Fallujah and one over Ramadi. And basically, you drop a center point, and then you have Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta around this center point. And that didn't move in Fallujah. It just dropped on the center of the city. Today, when we do it, we'll give you a target, and then we'll give you an Alpha, Bravo, Charlie. We don't even give you an Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta. We just tell you, hey, here's your coordinate. Go to Charlie 10. So I want you south for 10 miles. Yeah. And then you give them an offset and a final attack heading. They come in and do it. I mean, the days of CPIP matrix like we used to use, and what that would be is, I mean, back in the day when we were first flying Hornets, you would take off and fly for an hour and a half. And if you came back and your INS only drifted a mile, it was good. Mm-hmm. We would do an INS update when we landed. That's not okay today. No. And then, so all the airplanes, as they progressed, we started integrating GPS into them, and the GPS would constantly update the INS. And so we have the ability now to go from a CPIP matrix to a keyhole template. And I mean, the CPIP matrix, whether we knew it or not, there were actual ground things on the ground, like Mazda, or, as an example, like I'm going to tell you to go to Mazda, and Mazda is this mountain that's sitting over here, and okay, well, there's the map, and that's Mazda, and look, there it is, and then you'd fly to Mazda and turn right and do whatever else you did, and that's why we had those points. They were geographic points on the earth that you could see with your eyeballs. And now today, like I said, I would argue that the majority of the close air support that's conducted anywhere around the world is done with the keyhole template, which Static Kling, Colonel Gary Kling made in order to facilitate an easy executable plan in Fallujah.
Outstanding.
That's pretty cool.
And you think about that too, being that part of history, and then coming up with these things that are even used now, that people even use now. I mean, that's saying something.
Yeah.
Hey, last question for you both. Shrek, I want you to go first. If you went back to your first lieutenant self in your very first squadron.
With this guy, we were writing a schedule together.
I'm going to ask him in here in just a second. What are like 3 or 4 of your lessons learned through your career that you would tell your younger self?
Oh, man. I don't know if I really learned anything, but I had a good time.
Yeah. I think the first one would be, don't change the fun aspect of it.
That's right.
We had a lot of fun, and it's a hard job. You go to dirty, not so nice places in the world, but it was always fun.
Yeah, we made it fun.
Like, if it's not fun, you're doing something wrong.
And I think that I think that's one of the big things that we've lost in the military today is if you're not having fun, you're doing something wrong. And the amount of fun that we had. I mean, we worked hard, we played hard, we studied hard. You you need to know your weapon system inside and out. The first time that you get strap in the airplane better not be the first time that you strap in the airplane. You never have enough gas unless you're on fire. You know, I don't know. Let me think about that one a little bit more. But yeah, I agree with you.
Well, my son's in Pensacola right now, getting ready to start flight school.
Is he?
Something that both Byron and I have told him, both together and on separate occasions, is you know, I'd much rather I'll hire for attitude and train for proficiency. Meaning, you know, your outlook on, you know, you're going to do hard things. It's not always going to be easy.
Yeah.
But I'll take work ethic over raw talent any day. And you know, I was a state educated school kid from Nebraska, so I'm no Harvard graduate, I'll tell you that. But I tell my son the same thing. I'm like, just outwork everybody.
Be humble.
Humility is a huge factor in success in life, let alone fighter aviation.
Yeah.
Outwork everybody, be humble, and enjoy it.
Yeah.
I enjoyed my career ever since I was a 5-year-old kid, Steve. I wanted to fly 707s. I grew up, I was born in Centinela Hospital, about 2 miles from LAX.
Really?
And so my grandfather, you know, when I was 4, 5, 6 years old, we'd go and park at runways 26 left and right at LAX,
Mm-hmm.
when that was just a jackrabbit field behind the runways.
Hmm.
We and brand new 707s, DC-8s, Vickers Viscounts, Lockheed Constellations were still flying, 1960, 1961. And I'll never forget the first time a Pan Am 707 flew over the top of us. And of course, at that time, they didn't have a display threshold either. So the airplane was literally, you know, like, you know, 100 feet in the air. And I could feel it go into ground effect. And of course, in the moist air, you know, you had the huge vortex ribbons coming off the wingtips and everything, you know. And that's when I said to myself, why work for a living when I can do this? When I was 5, 6 years old.
Yeah.
And I went into pilot training, had no flying experience. I'd wanted to be a pilot all my life, but didn't finish first of the class, probably finished last of the class, but I finished, got KC-135s, and absolutely loved the mission. And it was so much fun. You know, I've had Marine F-18s that were flying out of Kadena. I was at Kadena for 5 years.
Yep.
You know, the Harriers obviously were off the KC-10s and everything, doing joint things at a joint base, just having a ball. And I agree with you. Have fun doing it, because
Yep.
the times when it wasn't fun was drudgery. Drudgery. Okay. And I have 2 bosses that I work for.
That too.
Yeah.
I had 2 bosses that I worked for that didn't make it fun.
When you think you have all the SA, think again, right?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great one. Yeah. When you think you've got the problem solved, go back and look at it one more time.
Yeah.
That's a great one. Gentlemen, we've gone for 2 hours. It's been great to have you both on. Shrek, thank you once again for popping up today and saying, hey, I'm ready. I really appreciate you doing this. Steve, thank you for joining.
You bet.
The Lessons from the Cockpit show today. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun having you both on like this and talking through particularly marine aviation, okay? And as I mentioned to Shrek when we in the previous episode, you know, people don't know what a MAGTAF is.
Mm-hmm.
They haven't heard of a MAGTAF, okay? The Marines go off and do their thing, okay? And when the fight gets tough, the Marines are the people that I want around. You know, I remember
that's their job.
Mm-hmm.
Go to bad places and do bad things to bad people.
Well, and it's interesting you say that, because I remember I was listening to some podcasts just recently. It may have been the Sean Ryan show, where they said they had to have an investigation of the Second Battle of Fallujah because the Marine Corps snipers had so many headshots that they thought that they were just executing people, walking up to them and executing them, and
Hmm.
people don't understand the kind of precision that the Marine Corps brings to a battlefield. And I have seen it because I was a joint warfighter and taught at the Joint Forces Staff College and everything. And had, matter of fact, I had a Marine sniper from Fallujah that got up and told that story about, what it was like.
Really?
Yeah, I guess there was something going on in the cemetery. They were hiding in the cemetery, and that became a big battle or so. Anyway, but gentlemen, thanks for your time tonight. I
Yeah,
really
thanks,
appreciate you coming
Sluggo.
on, man. Really
That's
appreciate
like
you coming.
nice thinking with you.
Folks, this is the first time I've ever had two people on at the same time. And this was just by luck, actually. Shrek says, "Hey, do you mind if I have a friend on tonight? Glibby?" And sure. Mott's one commander. Yeah, what could go wrong? Uh, I'm going to probably try and do this again. I would love to have Shrek and his dad on, retired Major General Lancer Sullivan, who at one point in time had the most flying hours of any Marine, to include several tours in Vietnam flying F4s. So we're trying to line that up now. This episode number 106, is brought to you by Wall Pilot, custom aviation art for the walls of your home office or hangar. 4, 6, and 8 foot prints on vinyl that you peel off and stick to any flat surface. They are weatherproof and they are dishwasher proof, we found out. So go to wallpilot.com. There's 158 ready to print right now that we can send off to you. Or if there's a favorite airplane that's not on the ready to print, fill out the form, the custom form, and let us do a custom one for you with your name on it from your unit, and your weapons load that you like. We can do all that. We're working on World War One, little difficult, and we're working on helicopters, as I've mentioned to you before. The main rotor hubs, are a killer to draw. But hey, we're getting there. And man, that gun on the Apache AH-64 is really painful to do it correctly. But I think we've got it done here soon. So go to wallpilot.com, order a couple of these because that's how we keep the show going. Other ways we keep the show going: subscribe here on my YouTube channel, and also become a member of my All Ranks Club on Patreon. Those of you that join at the designated driver and by the bar will get Q&A with me, even one-on-one time. We also have some wonderful stickers that we send out to people that become Patreon members, like this one and this one. There are 10 of them, and we send it to you every month, a new one to you every month. And as you can see, they peel off so that you can put them on water bottles. And like I said, folks, these are dishwasher proof. My water bottle has gone through the dishwasher 50, 60 times. This thing hasn't come off. So please go to my Patreon channel and join my All Ranks Club. If you just want to contribute to the show, folks, I have my Venmo page down below also. Uh, Something's weird with PayPal, so we got to fix that one. But those are the two ways you can really, really support our our podcast here. And again, folks, I so appreciate all of you coming by, downloading the shows, listening to the shows, and more importantly, a lot of you are starting to pass them on to your friends. I really appreciate that. The YouTube channel is going crazy. I've got over 220,000 subscribers now, and it's still climbing. So I appreciate all of you listening to the Lessons from the Cockpit show. Please subscribe, become a member of the Patreon Club, All Ranks Club. Those of you at the designated driver and by the bar get some pretty special time with me and some of my artwork. And virtual bar night coming this coming week, Wednesday night. I'll be live on YouTube at 7 o'clock Mountain Standard Time. And so that we can just talk about airplanes. Thanks again, folks. Sluggo signing out here.